to our video presentation today regarding the Illinois FirstNet project. My name is Bill Springer and I work for the Illinois Terrorism Task Force, and I'm the system architect for the state of Illinois on the FirstNet project. So let's talk about coverage a little bit. Coverage is key in a wireless network. If you don't have coverage in the areas where your responders are operating, that wireless network is useless to them. You have to have coverage where people operate. So when we're talking about coverage, we want to talk about where the reliable coverage is needed and for what levels and types of devices are out there. What are you using? So we'll talk about that in another couple of slides. Also capacity. How many potential users do you think are going to be in an area using the network? What's the area that they're going to be in? And what are they going to be doing? Are they doing all text-based or video? It's two separate designs almost if you're text only versus a heavily video network. Once we understand these things, that's when you can come up with a RAN design. You understand where your towers have to go and things like that. It gives you an estimated number of sites, and that's where you get your cost estimates from. So there's a lot of information that we're going to be looking for from the counties to help us understand these design issues. So let's talk about voice coverage versus data coverage. We're all used to voice coverage on our two-way radio systems, and voice coverage is very straightforward. Is it understandable? When I push my microphone and I talk, when you hear me, do you understand what I'm saying? It's a yes-no decision. Can you hear me now? Very straightforward. Data coverage is a lot more complex than that because data rates can be variable. The speed changes depending on the signal strength. So what's going on is, whenever I have my device and I'm doing whatever it is I'm doing and I'm right underneath the tower, the device and the cell system are actually communicating with each other. Not only my data stream, but there's background information. They're talking about a lot of things, including what's the signal strength and what's the error rate. So when I'm right underneath the tower, my phone tells the site, I'm getting you with a perfect signal strength, no errors, send me the data as fast as you can. So that's what occurs. So if I'm standing outside of a building, I may be able to send that streaming video back. So as I get away from the tower, or if I go inside of a building, now as my device is communicating with the cell system, it starts to say, hey, your signal strength has dropped. I'm starting to see errors. Slow it down so I don't get any errors. So now, maybe you could do streaming video outside a building. You go inside the building, you lost your ability to send video, although you can probably still send large files, photographs, things like that. If I go further and further into the building, my signal strength keeps dropping, my error rates keep going up. Now my device says, hey, slow it way down. You may eventually reach a point where you can only do text type information. I can only enter stuff on text, send it, and get it back in a text format. So data rate in the coverage is really a big puzzle. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle. It's a huge moving target. So if we look at these coverage maps, you'll notice there's a dark green, a medium green, and a light green. That corresponds to in-building coverage, handheld on-street coverage, and vehicular coverage. What makes that very complicated is that also affects your video or large files or texting. So in that green area, that means maybe you can video, or maybe if you go a little bit further away, we've got large files or text. It's a giant moving target, and we haven't pinned down yet from FirstNet on the national level what these data rates are going to be. What are the criteria for coverage? So keep this in mind when we're talking about data coverage. It's not only where you're at, not only what type of device you're using, it's also what you're doing. That affects your coverage. So as an example, if I'm standing in a particular area, if I'm using a vehicular modem, I might be able to do video. If I have my handheld device, I can't do video. So just think about it in those terms. It's a huge moving target. The maps that we've built for all the counties, those are proposed coverage objectives, and they're based on population density. So what they did was at the federal level from the Office of Emergency Communications, they took a look at this and said, we need to have a starting point for the coverage discussion. So they looked at population density and they said, in the highly populated areas that are shown as dark green on the map, since there's a lot of people in there, you're probably going to need in-building coverage. In the medium green areas where there's a somewhat lower population density, the thought was, well, if you're fewer population, on-street coverage is probably adequate for the portable devices. The light green is very low population density, and the thought was, well, we can probably get by with vehicular coverage where I can talk from a vehicular modem back to the cell site. And then the light colored areas, the white or the beige, since there's extremely low population density, the thought was, well, maybe we don't need coverage in there because there's not much going on. What we found is that's a good way to miss things. This can miss important features. It's just a starting point to talk about the coverage discussion. These are coverage proposal maps. The best way to tell is they're all blocks. Those are all based on population density. An actual coverage map would be based on an actual design. We'd have known tower sites, things like that. We're not to that point yet. The maps we've built up for all the counties are based on the coverage proposals and the coverage objectives. So there's your objectives that OEC came up with. In-building coverage, if you've got more than 1,000 people per square mile. Handheld on the street is at 500. Vehicular coverage is at 5 people. And then where they say coverage is not required, it's less than 5 people per square mile. Where that gets you into trouble is if you look at these areas where nobody's living, in some cases it's just open fields. In other cases, there's things there. For instance, nobody lives at a nuclear power plant. However, that's one area we want to make sure we've got good coverage at based on a population analysis that shows coverage isn't needed. And the same thing applies for things like chemical plants, dock and port facilities, rail yards, things like that. People don't want to live there, but we may have to actually operate there and operate at a very high level. So that's where the population analysis kind of falls short. And we understand that, and we're looking at that, and that's one of the things we're talking to the counties and all the agencies about is, here's the coverage proposal, what do we actually need to have? So at least it's just a starting point for us to understand coverage and start gathering that information. Device type comparison is another big issue. If you notice on the left side, that's the coverage in a given area for a vehicular modem. That's a very good RF platform. There's an external antenna, it's a higher powered radio. So as you can see, they've got saturated coverage. They can operate pretty much everywhere in their area. On the right side is a USB dongle. That's not a very good RF platform. The antenna is wrapped up inside the dongle. It operates at a very low power. Basically, that thing only has coverage when it's near a tower site. So again, adding to the complexity of coverage is what kind of device are you going to be using? At Illinois FirstNet, we've developed proposed coverage maps for all the counties in Illinois, all 102 counties. And we'll discuss those with each county and all their agencies when we have the county by county meetings coming up over the next year.